making decisions for site, as well as talking about how you're doing prescription transfer. And the trials that we did in Iowa this year, one of our biggest challenges was getting prescriptions to machinery effectively for the side dress applications to be carried out correctly. And so I want to get a better understanding of kind of how y'all are transferring prescriptions, if you're transferring prescriptions at all, if you want to have paper reports in the cab to be able to verify prescriptions, all these different elements that go into successfully executing a side dress so that we can make sure we're getting that right as we go about deploying our side dress nitrogen solution. And then again, want to get a better understanding of what your cadence is as you're going into side dress. How are you determining, when you're going to make an application? How many days out from that application are you really deciding on that rate? How many times do you need to update that rate heading into an application? Those sorts of things. So those are two of the main questions that I would love to get y'all's feedback on so that we are building things the right way heading into next year. So Lauren, hopefully that aligns with what is good with you for today. And hopefully we can have some good discussion on those points.
That's perfect. And open it up to questions. I did hit the record button because I do have a few guys that aren't on the call that I want to make sure they hear it. But Andrew or Jacob, I think you do some prescription stuff. Keith, I don't know about you. If you feel free to unmute yourself and ask Jackson questions, or I'll give you our experience. I mean, we do all prescriptions through John Deere MyOps, but even there, the learning curve this year, John Deere changed a few things. So learning and understanding how that worked and having the ability to adjust it on the fly was critical. I mean, the first field we pulled into, we had I think 6 phone calls in the first round, making sure the prescription got up and working. But then once we had the prescription working, it worked flawless and stuff like that. And having that ability to quickly adjust the rate, because I think the biggest problem ours was they had it set up for actual pounds and we're applying gallons. So getting that translated quickly was pertinent for us.
Yeah.
And
Lauren, when you're saying 6 calls, who are you typically calling about those prescriptions? Is it the prescription provider? Is it the John Deere
yes,
dealership? Okay.
well, and the simplest there was we actually had our local John Deere guy talk right to the Iowa Soybean Association guy that was providing the prescriptions, and quickly, they learn, they know the language, they know the dot files, whatever it all has to be. And I used to know a lot more of that, but I've been so far removed from some of the application stuff myself anymore. But I learned a lot quickly just riding with him I was in the Hagee right with him when we did all that. So,
Sure.
and like I said, we were trying to figure it out in the cab, and it's like, well, these guys know what they're talking about. Let's get them talking and solve the problem quick that way. So, but
Yep.
Andrew, are you in a spot where you can chime in? You had the experience too, so.
Hey Jackson, Andrew here. Yeah, just kind of what Lauren hit on. With our guy that does our prescriptions, we set up stuff about a couple days before we start side dressing everything. So it's not so much within a couple day thing. I guess this year with the rains every day, not knowing what fields we're going to be in and stuff, kind of threw us off too with getting stuff done with you because it just was a constant change on quickly going to a different field or this or that.
Sure.
Yeah, timeliness is a big thing for us on getting prescriptions like that because we just are always on the move. You can do quite a bit of acres an hour and you're constantly moving.
Definitely. And are y'all kind of doing the same thing, Andrew, from the John Deere Operations Center file transfer standpoint for most of your prescriptions, or are y'all using thumb drives, or how are y'all going about doing that?
Yep, we're sending everything through the John Deere Operations Center to everything.
Awesome.
Joe,
And then
you've done quite a bit of prescription. Any input? Maybe he's still under the house.
Maybe get stuck.
But no, I mean, timing wise, the question I had after what we went through this spring, is there a way a guy could test the system without actually being in the field to make sure, because I know, well, the guy that was here applying ours, the co-op came and they downloaded a bunch of prescriptions. They thought they had it right, and even tested it on his machine when he's not there. But even there, when they, that was a co-op prescription, and when he got to the field, they had to come out and redo all that. So learning and understanding each system is critical, I think. And I gotta shut my door here.
Sure. No, I think there's.
I'm on. I'm not stuck under the house traveling, and I thought you were asking somebody else
Good.
more. And actually, I didn't hear my name cut out on me a second. I'm ag leader. So I talked about, I forget the name now, but the one that was available through Corteva for a couple of years, and then got shelved. I really did like that platform. As I mean, literally the night before, we got a rain shower this week, and I was in a side dress the next day. I could go in, have the model updated for the rain event, so its algorithm would recalculate. I could export a given field onto my flash drive, USB stick, and take that to the field with me the next day, and just stick it in the monitor, grab that shape file combo, and roll with it. And generally, yes, I do like to have a printed map. Probably not as much anymore. I mean, if I carry my iPad with me and I can see it on my iPad through Agfinity, that works as well. Just validation, verification, or getting totals for a given field, so like plant product stuff. The only other thing, is yes, I'm gallons rate, but you need to be able at some point to factor in if a guy is using additives beyond 32 or 28, such as ammonium thiosulfate, and factor that into those blends. If the guy's looking for a target pounds anyway. So that's something I always had to do a little bit of math on my own. Just, if it calls for 30 gallons of 32, but I know I'm putting in a 3 or 4 gallons in that blend of bio, then I'd have to use a factor, and then, maybe I'm running 34 gallons of total product instead. So that's a couple of things I guess I'd have as things to be aware of. But I like the ability to update it with weather events and, have as close to an application time as I could, the best data I could before making that application. Otherwise, before that system, I would budget for a field and then build prescription maps based on that overall budget number for what I was planning, which is not an exact science.
Joe, on the product side and accounting for the blends, I mean, do you feel like you could go into a software and select, a couple of different products that you were putting into a blend, and like what percentage of the total blend you were running, and almost like create a new product and then assign that to a prescription? Do you feel like that's an easy enough solution? Do you feel like we need to have things preloaded? What are your thoughts there?
It's going to depend on the individual capabilities. Myself, within the ag leader, when I upload the prescription, I can do a rate or a factor with it. So if I know, if the prescription's based on, say, 32% nitrogen, then I know I'm running a blend that is 95% of that. I can go in and take that 30 gallons divided by 0.95 and come up with whatever number that is, like 39, and what that percentage is. And type that in, and it'll immediately take that description file instead of saying like 3,000 gallons. Now all of a sudden it's 3,200. So I see that before I validate and make that active, if that makes sense.
It does.
But
yeah.
it's I don't know if necessarily every machine operator is going to be able to do that math on the fly reliably. So I think it would not be hard for most operations to say exactly what their blend is in advance. That way, this prescription, because that generally probably won't change. You know, a guy knows they want to run this much thio or whatever additive is in with the 28 or 32 that they're utilizing.
When would you say that blend typically gets decided, Joe? Like prior to planting? Is it, a few weeks prior to side dress? What does that time frame look like?
I don't know for other people, but for me, I'm generally, I would say by planting time, that's pretty much, I know if I'm going to run after planting what I've run and how much more sulfur I want out there for the thio, especially.
Got it.
So I'll have that budget number at that point.
Got it. Thank you.
I was hoping Adam Kramer would be able to jump on, but I see he must be in typical Wisconsin driving conditions. He keeps fading in and out. So if we see him jump on, we'll try to get him on. But Jacob, are you doing any prescriptions, or I know you got some experience in this world?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I do variable rate planting. Have traditionally used a 2020 display. Now we run all ag leader, and what I do is because it's really easy, I actually take my prescriptions and upload them into Operations Center first before trying to do anything with them in our ag leader display. Because if it works in the ag leader display, or excuse me, if it works in Operations Center, it'll work in the ag leader display. I'm hoping that there will be a time when Operations Center can send prescriptions directly to an ag leader display, but currently what I have to do is I have to use a USB stick, or I can upload them into Agfinity, and then Agfinity will cloud sync them to the ag leader displays. But in terms of ease of use to just open up a prescription and see if it's working, Operations Center, in my experience, is by far the easiest, and it's free.
Interesting. So you basically just use the Op Center to kind of verify the attributes that are in that prescription, make sure that they're in the right units, that sort of stuff. Jacob?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Interesting. That's good to know. And also good to know that a couple of y'all are using Ag Leader and Agfinity. That's an integration that we have not focused on building out yet, but it sounds like it's maybe a more dominantly used product than what we thought.
Do you have Jacob and Joe, do you have tech guys that you would recommend we connect with Jackson on that?
For what
For the ag leader connection, with that, are you working with Pete Youngblood down there, or?
No, I work with Chris Bloom and Chuck Hadachik at Premier Technologies. They're one of the Blue Delta dealers.
Yeah, if you're dealing with a home office Premier, I would probably say that would be a good one. My local rep, I'm not as hipped up on. That works for him, but the home office guys, I would be.
Okay, do either of you have a contact you could share, and I'll get that to Jackson, or not? Doesn't have to be right now, but try to help make that connection there. Is that something we should be talking right to Ames Ag Leader to help make that?
Probably both, honestly, Lauren. With Ames, I think we can have a contact that we can talk to get into Ames, but I think it's really helpful to hear from some of the dealers out there, that are actually using the technology in the field to get some validation that this might be worth having for some growers. So both are helpful.
Alrighty. Keith, any updates on or any input on, I don't know if you're using any prescription stuff or?
No, we're not using any prescription stuff. Most of our fields
What's that?
are pretty consistent. So we haven't.
I thought you picked it up.
And I'll get Joe on mute
Oh,
here.
I was listening to a call yet. No, that's fine.
Okay, I got him on. Dan, are you doing prescription up there? Any input?
Just, I have the elevator spread, P and K variable and micros, stuff like that, but myself, no, my soil is, very consistent. I mean, I got 70% of it's one soil type and all but maybe just a few acres is, another soil type, and they're both heavy. There isn't much difference in them. I wouldn't think there'd be any advantage in, variable rate and seed. My son does a lot of it, but you don't have to go far from me, and they have, difference within the same field more. But I'm a little different that way. Yeah, he does a lot of seed, and of course he writes prescriptions for the P and K for the elevators around here and that. So, but I'm familiar
Alrighty.
with it, but it just wouldn't pay me to put it together.
Alrighty, I'm hoping Adam jumps up back on here. He said he'd be back on in a few minutes, so. But any other questions, Jackson, or anybody for Jackson, I guess? Thomas, you have any thoughts what you're hearing?
So Jackson, do you have I guess, are you utilizing current like NOAA weather information in your modeling, or how are you building out the system, I guess, as it relates to current right now conditions and or future seasonal norms for a given location anyway, for the nitrogen management?
Great question. So the way that we are currently building out the system with the weather data that we have access to and have already integrated into the system is we're basically using median decadal weather as the future casting weather for us right now, as far as beyond 14 days. And then we're using a 14-day forecast that is an ensemble model forecast. And what we're really focusing on is if we can improve nitrogen uptake in the next 14 days for the crop, that's going to be our highest certainty. And that's where we can really base a lot of our ROI on. And what we're essentially looking at doing is combining the optical imagery that we get alongside this crop model, doing corrections of the crop model with the optical imagery data points that we get, and then using the model to inform long-term nitrogen demand and the imagery to inform short-term nitrogen demand, and then combining those two amounts together to inform the total rate. So that's really the way that we're constructing the system. The weather does update daily. So we basically go and get a new weather forecast and historical weather pull after midnight every day. And rerun the model to update. That model also reruns on any operational data update within the system. So that's how we currently have it constructed. We are actively talking to other weather providers right now. And I'm actually kind of curious to get y'all's thoughts on any weather systems that you're using, that you're seeing effectiveness with, but we are looking at some providers that do produce what they would call a seasonal forecast or even a sub-seasonal forecast, so that we can actually get projected forecasted data out to 3 to 12 months, because that's what I really think is going to be necessary to produce an optimal solution moving forward.
I do see Adam joined us again. Adam, could you tell your experience with transferring data to and from monitors, and what are you seeing? What's the best way to get it from prescription to the applicator and the monitor?
So I started soil sampling and data transfer back in 2005. So I come all the way from manually calculating scripts on a common delimited spreadsheet and manually entering those data points to now with all this automation that's come through the softwares. We use a product called Cirrus, and it'll slingshot to Raven monitors. That's really easy. Now Raven's been bought, so I don't know. I think we'll be able to slingshot to Red equipment. John Deere's system is really easy to work with, but it's inclusive. So if you're not on their system, you still have to use the old thumb drive method. And on the nitrogen side, like all this stuff is evolving constantly for us, but I've used a product called Adapt In, and that has some synergy with the Cirrus program that we use. So we can also slingshot nitrogen scripts through that platform. And we do a lot of side dress where I'm at. So that's been kind of a big tool for us to use. One thing that I like about the weather updates, that script on the nitrogen side will change. We just have to update it before we offload it. So you have to check it. You know, we won't send that script out until the day of. And so I think everybody I'm kind of in and out because where I live and work, cell phones work about a third of the time. So if this is repetitive, I'm sorry. But in my experience, the cumbersome part comes from the data transfer comes from waiting for that time when the operator is going to go to the field. And if you have to deliver that data to the field, you kind of got to be on call. And if the weather's not looking like it's going to change, like we have no rain in the forecast, say for a few days, you'll get by with sending that script out ahead of time. But we really try to push it to the very last minute, so we have the most current weather model on it. So any way that we can wirelessly transfer, I know like Ag Leader, we also have their system. I'm drawing a blank on what that's called, but like we can remote transfer, what's that, Agfinity. We can remote transfer to those monitors too. So any kind of remote data transfer is really, really huge if you're going to scale any script offering like that, because if you're covering any geography and folks aren't set up, we're either using Google Drive to shoot that stuff over, then they're downloading it, handling it themselves. And that's always been the biggest bottleneck for us in precision agriculture, is just matching the capacity of the operator or the service provider to the software, and then making sure that we're all in the same like platform. It's gotten a lot simpler with everything kind of going to shape files now, but there's still a lot of oddball stuff out there that you have to make sure you understand what monitor you're writing to, and can they wirelessly communicate with it? If they can't, then you got to use something else like Google Drive to store it. So we're getting by. It's better than it ever was, but I still think we have a long ways to go in that. So anybody that's going to introduce a tool that can streamline that is going to be a really good dude, in my opinion.
Definitely. Adam, I got a couple other questions for you, if that's all right.
Sure.
What is the latest, or I guess what is the range of growth stages that you're seeing people side dress corn in your area?
Well, we're driving through a lot of it early on, like, I don't know, V6 to V9 probably is the majority of it.
Great. That's super helpful. And then on the Adapt In side, since you have some experience there, what have you really liked about Adapt In, and what, if anything, have you not liked so much?
Well, variable rate nitrogen to me is terrifying because it's fairly new to our people anyway. There's not a lot of that has been going on. So one year I think it was in 2021. We got really dry, or was it 2022? Either way, a couple years back, we got really, really dry. And so Adapt In was telling us that the nitrogen that we applied early was going to carry through, which I'm sure it did. But when it came back to do our side dress, a lot of fields were calling for no nitrogen at all or very little. Or we usually put on, say we had like 100 pounds down, we'd come back in with 50, 60 pounds on a rotated corn crop. Well, it was calling for 0 to 30. And I cheated it because it made me too nervous to send that. And the guys that I was working with, the same situation. We just weren't comfortable with the tool yet. And we tried a couple spots where we just didn't apply as much or not at all and just went with that actual script.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we probably shortchanged ourselves on yield a little bit with that. So, I mean, I look back to the information that you put into the system is super critical. Like, that tool will utilize soil testing results. So if you have a grid soil test and you have your organic matter, CEC, all that stuff populates into that script. So you're taking into account not only soil type, weather, but you're also got a current soil test on a grid. Well, then you can make a pretty tight script. But these guys that don't have that information, you're really going off Sergo data, and it's pretty vague. And so you're kind of putting a lot of trust in a tool that's working with limited information. And I think that exposes a problem that we got in the industry, that if we don't have good, clean, repeatable data, then these tools are going to be limited in what the accuracy and what we're going to apply, mainly because we're just lacking all the information that we need to make a refined script.
Yeah. And I think pretty much all models suffer from that same issue where you have to have, up-to-date application info. You have to have, all products that were applied, rates, planting information, hybrids, maturities, all of that sort of stuff. Have you seen anything work, Adam, in your experience to help make that information gathering easier or convince folks to get information into the platform to make it work correctly?
I think it's like a lot of things that we talk about. There's a lot of great tools out here. Again, I've come from literally inputting data manually and building scripts on a spreadsheet to all this automation and transfer is great, but it still goes back to the core concept that the fundamental approach to data management is to repeat the data. So if we soil test, then we need to go back to that same exact point when our crop rotation is completed, repeat that same soil sampling pass in the same exact spot, measure the results against the yield, the application rates, all those things, evaluate that, and then adjust. And so many times, we just don't have that repeatability. And I always say this, and I know that this is a group of farmers, and I'd be interested in some feedback on this, but there are so many things that provide a return on investment if you do them right. And I always use the dairy farmer analogy that, a good friend of mine that milks 1,000 cows, he says, if I put every supplement in that feed ration, my cows would be doing 400 pounds a day. And that's just not the case. So there's a recipe in all this stuff that if we actually make the decision, it's like a cultural practice. I'm going to be a really good data manager. I'm going to harvest data, and then I'm going to use that data to generate new information every year. Every time I go to the field, it's new information so I can make a new decision to do what's next. And once we switch that mindset, then we become borderline obsessive about making sure that all that stuff is tight. And when that stuff gets tight and we're actually utilizing that data, to make those decisions. Now we got something really powerful because the tools are there. It just comes down to that human interaction with that technology that we're going to have good, clean data in there, and it works. I mean, it does. And then I just hear it a lot that folks will say, well, that doesn't work for me. And I understand it probably didn't, but did you do everything right? And did you do it on time? If you didn't, then it's just a crapshoot. You might as well not even have tried to utilize all that stuff and spent the money. So, and I know I'm being blunt, but that's just my opinion on it.
And maybe one more question for you. You said that guys in your area are not really variable rate nitrogen applying, right? And I totally get that. I mean, we're coming out of fertigation where folks don't variable rate apply. It's we want to know when we need to apply and how much for the whole field. Would you say that that's more how farmers in your area are thinking about side dress, or are some of them starting to turn that mindset to let's get the right amount in the right place at the right time, all three of those?
I think everybody wants to efficiently use nitrogen, and the biggest problem that we have are just our geography. I mean, I work a lot right along the Mississippi River, and I live and work right near the confluence of the Wisconsin Mississippi River. So you can't even throw a rock around here without hitting watershed. And we have and Wisconsin's a little bit different than some of the other northern Great Plains states, where we have a lot of oversight in that space. So folks are really focused on it. I think with all the manure applications that we have, that's one of the things that we really led with is we know that we're getting X amount of nitrogen out, and it's really hard to variable rate manure. Although we have tried doing some of that. John Deere's got a tool, and they can do that now. But what we've been doing is just baselining an application and then adjusting based off weather, especially in those manure situations. It's like, okay, we know we got 120 pounds out there. We know that we're growing corn on corn. We're going to need more than that. So we'll wait until, right the day of that we're going to apply. A lot of that is top dressed, urea, or we do liquid. And the liquid applicators, we got guys that can get a lot of acres covered, but there's some that are limited that way. So they just start. So it's kind of all, I'm kind of rambling on that, but it's all across the board. I think everybody's trying to refine that process so we know that what the weather is going to show us versus what we actually need is the trick. So wait until the last minute is just kind of the way that we've been doing it. And I'm open to other suggestions if there is any, but that's just how we've been doing it.
Makes sense. That's awesome.
My observation along that lines would be is the guys that are running Coulter side dress rigs, in that V4, V5 area. That type of operation, that's where I was. You're so early in the season, there's so much unknown for weather factors yet, where it's a lot harder sell to believe in a variable rate prescription in that scenario because you just don't know. So you're going to probably err and put more out there in case it gets flushed because you're just so early in that crop. The guys that are wide dropping with high clearance rigs later in that crop growth have more options to tailor it to the seasonal needs. And that was one of the factors taking me over to that side anyway here with my equipment for next year.
Sure. It's a great point. Honestly, it's something that I mentioned earlier, we're really looking at that 14-day window where we have a more certain forecast than the long-term weather forecast. And if we can affect nitrogen uptake within that 14 days as much as possible, and we're accounting for as much of the nitrogen uptake of the corn crop as possible within that 14 days or prior to, I think that's where we're getting to that highest certainty, right? And starting to put some probability metrics around, what is the likelihood that this is actually going to happen from a nitrogen uptake improvement standpoint. I think the key will be kind of, simplifying down how that information is translated, right? And how clear it is. But I think there's a ton of truth to just pushing that application back to get to higher certainty and getting a better sense of what that crop outcome will be. It's good
I
to
guess
go.
one other thing that kind of ties to that, I know there's operations. My son works for one where they don't have much nitrogen out in advance. So and I know another operation down by Story City area. So they're outside dressing in that V45 because that's when they're putting the bulk of their nitrogen out. And they don't have, unless a co-op or someone else came in, they do not wide drop that afterwards. They could if there was a economic return to doing so. I guess the question I have for the group is, was it granular? Was that what that platform was that had the model that I spoke of earlier? Has anyone else utilized that platform? Or does anyone else know if that exists where you might be able to take a peek at that yet in some sort of archive form? Just to see how that system worked as far as inputting, your field location and how it built out that model with the window of future weather based on like 30-year norms.
Yeah, me personally, we go back to in circuit days. That's when we started doing variable rate nitrogen in that, and then we kind of got away from it as I weaned off corn acres. But I know Iowa soy is pushing it pretty hard. What's Jacob still? Or we lost Jacob, but a young Miller gal that he used to work with a lot. She's with Iowa State now, and they're pushing some nitrogen variable rate nitrogen plots pretty hard in that. So, but the key for us is having a base rate of nitrogen out there with the planter, and then coming back and wide drop. And the more confidence we get in the whole system, that's where this variable rate stuff and that's going to work, or that the late prescription is really going to fit our system good. This year I think it was July 4th is when we buried the Hagee, so we know the extremes. That's going to be the big extreme. On a wet year like this year, you are going to risk late application and the weather. So having a little more upfront is probably better.
With that, Lauren, that comment about missing or being too late on an application, I mean, do you see any value to a system that is looking at the field and telling you, you might be getting within 7 days of needing nitrogen out in this field, so you could adjust the timing of that side dress, or is that just too much to handle logistically?
No, I mean, something that would send me an alert saying, hey, you're getting, maybe you should push the window. And if we got the rain forecast and all that we could run just a little bit earlier, that would probably be handy. But then, having the applicator ready to go at that time too is, critical too. So, but we can always call in planes too, I guess, worst case. And question I'd have back for Adam is he's helped program a lot of monitors. What's the best way to make sure the prescription's stuck with the monitor and is functional?
Well, I think somebody mentioned this earlier before I lost the call, but we always try to get everything loaded and then take a look at it ahead of time. There's still different kinds of monitors over there that on the receiving end that if you download or upload into that monitor, you have to select, I'm thinking like some ag leader monitors, not the brand new 1200 doesn't do that, but some older firmware, you have to select the column that it's pulling the actual script from. And this gets pretty sketchy because behind the scenes and all this stuff is a CSV spreadsheet, and you'll have an actual nitrogen application rate and a product application rate. So whether you're using liquid or urea or whatever, we've had folks in the past click the wrong cell, and they'll be over applying or under applying, depending on, usually over apply. So just making sure that either if it's electronic, you have a map in front of you with the rates, or at least a summary page or something of what you should be applying in that field, and then just check it, because you hate to make a mistake on nitrogen. I mean, that's so costly anyway.
But that's a big deal. Just kind of, it's almost like a dry run. We always just go through every field, look at it. Does it look right before we ever actually start applying product?
You just triggered a thought I had, Adam. I know when I was riding with him, the Iowa State had some pretty high rates in there for your high rate checks, and it would have been handy to have a visual to know that them spots were coming up so he could slow down. You know, a lot of times he didn't know that was coming until all of a sudden the alarm starts going off that he was low rate and stuff like that. So yes, definitely being able to look ahead and see where your rates are changing would be pretty handy. And like I said, when I used to do all the application on the deer monitor I was running back then, you could actually see the prescription on as we're applying the way I ran it. So we kind of knew that, but apparently the newer ones, I don't know if you can see that or not. So
No, you can't on the ag leader, or you couldn't. Maybe they fixed that for this
I
year.
can
I
see
don't
it
know.
on my 1200.
Okay, good.
It isn't great, but there is a shading in anyway of the area to be applied, and generally it's like a blue-gray scale. And then it changes to a multicolor once it's applied. But you can see that as you're coming up to it relatively on a split screen.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask the group too is where we work, there's a lot of, it's like ridge and valley kind of ground, and it's pretty rough topography. So we still do variable rate nitrogen, but we've been blending urea and ESN in those really odd shaped fields, because we go in there with a ground rig later on. We just slaughter the corn. So we tried using ESN and urea, and we've been having pretty decent luck with that ESN product. And you can cheat any system. We just tell it it's a 45% dry nitrogen product, and it'll still spit out the same script. A lot of systems don't recognize ESN, but that's how we've been getting around that. I don't know if anybody else has used that. That polymer coating is supposed to break down later in season, so we get that flush of nitrogen later like we want. I haven't noticed any deficiency symptoms with front loading it like that. But I'm curious if anybody else has used that.
we were running a lot of Amidas, which is a melted AMS and UAN and AMS, I believe, or urea UAN or AMS. My brain's fried here, but I always like that one. It's very consistent. You know, we were running a Montauk at that time, and it would go through that pretty consistently, and you didn't need the nitrification inhibitor. It's kind of a natural stabilized. Any other thoughts or inputs, Jackson, or anybody else want to chime in yet? See, we lost Jacob, but
I think this has been really, really helpful. It's been awesome to get so many different perspectives in a short amount of time here. So I've got a lot of information that I want to kind of sift through here, and some of it aligns, but I think some of it also helps us to reprioritize some things we thought may not be as high a priority. So definitely appreciate y'all, just providing your input on all of this morning.
okay, I'm going to stop recording now.